and welcome everyone. We are back with another 17thfloor.com live networking event. As a quick reminder, before we get into the topic and introduction of our guest, the 17th Floor is an online community that is focused on the growing practice of human capital management, which gathers HR, accounting, and payroll professionals together under one roof for peer to peer engagement, education, and mentorship. Every couple of weeks, we host one of these live chats featuring different industry guests and experts, in which we, and of course you, our members, can chat about our experiences in uplifting businesses by elevating the well being of our employees. My name is Sam Fiorella, and I'm once again honored to be your moderator for this event. Speaking of which, we are talking, as we know, always about human capital management. And as practitioners of this practice, we know that employee engagement is crucial to the health and sustainability of any business. And there are many reasons at the source of low engagement, but leaders don't always detect it amongst their team members and often don't tackle this issue head on, or because they just either don't know how to measure it, they don't know how to identify it, they don't know how to do it. They're focused on performance instead of engagement. Lots of reasons, and so that's why we chose employee engagement today as our topic, and we chose to invite David Wexler. David Wexler. It's not a difficult
Sorry.
of a name. I'm not going to say what's in my coffee cup this morning.
Yeah.
Uh, we chose David to join us because, as an executive advisor, David leverages many years of global experience in building recognized, market leading, healthy corporate working environments. He's worked across publicly traded, privately owned, and even crown corporations. In the 30 years of executive leadership roles, across all these industries: aviation, technology, financial services, and even consumer packaged goods. He's worked in HR roles for companies like the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board, the GTAA, EA Sports, CIBC, so on and so on and so on. We were talking earlier, at our age, these bios get longer and longer and longer, so we're going to keep it short. But suffice it to say, David is definitely the expert we want to have on this topic. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Sam. Happy to be here.
So for those of you watching live, whether you're on our LinkedIn or YouTube live broadcast, feel free to ask any questions as we go along in the chat. We will try and get to them. If you are listening to this in replay on our site, the17floor.com, or listening to the podcast, jump onto the site and feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. And one of our mentors, or maybe David or I, will be able to jump on in the future and answer that question for you. So let's just jump into it, David. As we discussed before, I always like to start with some definitions. Speaking of benchmarks, let's talk about benchmarks so that we're all talking about the same things. Is there a difference between employee engagement and employee performance? You want to talk a little bit about that? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, so they are connected, and typically higher employee engagement should, if everything else is working, lead to higher employee performance. But they are two separate entities. And the thing about employee engagement is, I'm sure there's a really good definition on Google or somewhere that I haven't looked up. But if you ask 10 people for a definition of employee engagement, you'll probably get 15 different answers. I think about employee engagement in terms of that percentage of talent that you as an individual bring to work every day and that you are willing to share with your employer for the benefit of the organization. The closer you get to 100% of that potential talent to share, the higher the engagement that you are displaying. In terms of performance, performance depends not only on employee engagement, but it also depends on other factors. It depends on how much authority you have, how many obstacles you have to get through in order to be able to do your job to the fullest extent possible. And it depends as well on the kind of leadership in the culture in the organization that you're a part of.
So if I'm hearing this right, engagement is really providing or ensuring that the employee is available to provide their services. How well they provide their services is a whole other issue that comes into training and productivity tools and everything else. But it's trying to ensure that your employee is there and available to work and has the optimal, I guess, environment with which to work.
Yeah. So first off, this definition of the percent of your talent potential you're willing to share is really something that I tend to use, and I tend to think in terms of a part of my role as a senior human resources or a senior executive being to try to increase that percentage of talent you're willing to share. In terms of availability, I think the talent is almost always available, and so I think it comes back to motivation.
Hmm.
Um, are you willing to? Do you want to? Do you feel encouraged to? Um, Unleash that full talent potential. And if you do, if you're able to, then to me again, that represents a gain for the employer, not only in terms of your engagement, but that translating everything else being in place into higher performance.
Well, that's why we should care, because there's going to be a lot of people who see this topic and are joining now, maybe never had the conversation of engagement versus performance. Is that the reason that we should be, caring about what employee engagement is in our companies?
Yeah, I'd like to think that there's both a business and an altruistic aspect to this. Just altruistically, we should be creating healthy work environments that people thrive in. And so, when you hear about some of the things that have gone on in places like Twitter, um, or back in the day, places like General Electric, where they would fire the lowest 10% of performing employees. Um, these are horrific work environments. These are not environments that are healthy for all employees. So that's the altruistic side. And then from a business perspective, and I've always thought of myself as a business leader, not an HR leader. It's just the way I contribute to business success looks different than, say, chief marketing officer's contributions might look. From a business perspective, it makes huge sense to create that kind of highly engaged employee population, because it should allow you as an employer to do more with the same number of employees than your competitors are able to do.
Okay. See, I have the way I look at it within my organization, and it sounds like maybe I've been doing something right. I don't know. But I'd like to get your take on that. Just based on that, is I've always seen or believed that if you create an environment where your employees are happy both in the office and outside of the office, that you ensure that their mental health is good, that they are financially smart and capable, so that they have investment advice, and we're helping them with how to plan their lives, not just give them a paycheck, but what to do with that paycheck, how to save money, how to spend it well, all these things, providing, who's identifying who's a caregiver in the company, something we've talked about in the past, that you create an environment where their engagement is high, in that they are physically, mentally, emotionally strong enough, as well as the capable part, which is why they're hired, because they're capable. But that isn't enough. You have to do the other side. Does that line up to what you see is successful in developing an employee workforce when it comes to engagement?
Yeah, so I would say that those are necessary, but they're not sufficient. Um, that there are two things that are really crucial to not only having high employee engagement, but also having an employee workforce that can thrive and be successful. And those two things are great leadership and having a vision and mission and clearly articulated strategic plan for the organization. In other words, I can create the greatest place in the world to work. Employees can have um, everything that they might desire in terms of how they're treated and opportunities to learn and grow and and being empowered and all the rest of it. But if there's no vision and no mission and no strategic direction for the organization with clearly articulated goals and objectives and timeframes and measures of success, then that organization will be great in the short term and ultimately not be successful.
Okay, so I want to get to the measurement and tracking and measurement of this in a second, but so uh, just to kind of recap what you said there, if you don't, it's one thing to do it, it's one thing to create that environment where human capital is a focus and strengthening that human capital in your business, but it's not going to just saying it or even doing it is not enough without it being part of an integrated business plan. So putting your putting that human capital or developing human capital, it's got to be listed in your business plan as is your product development, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why the role of human resources is so important. But it's not important as a standalone entity. It has to be aligned with in working, in partnership with the business.
Hmm.
When I think about human resources, again, I'm thinking about it as a means to contribute to business success. And so, if, for example, the organization says we have a vision to double our revenues in the next 10 years, and working backwards from doubling our revenues over the next 10 years, this is what that looks like in terms of revenue growth each year. And when we break down that revenue growth, this is what it looks like in terms of existing products and services, new products and services, companies that we may acquire. And then I will take that and that will then factor into my building, for example, a human capital plan. How many people are we going to need for a business that is twice the size in 10 years? And what does that growth in human capital, in headcount in part, look like? And what does the organization design look like? And how are we going to get the people we're going to need at the different levels to be able to lead as
Hmm.
we grow to double the revenue? So there are all kinds of different elements that factor into that plan. And I know maybe we're going far beyond employee engagement, and there are so many things we could talk about. But again, if you have low employee engagement, you are not going anywhere. Not only are you not going anywhere, but you have to really watch out because you are at risk of losing people, having health issues, and having other problems that are actually going to make matters a lot worse for you.
Yeah, it is certainly a complex subject, which is one of the reasons why 17th floor was started, was to be able to tackle all of these and hear from people direct and have uh, this peer-to-peer mentorship and discussion that we've been trying to foster. So let's actually make this a little bit more tangible for those people not as well versed in this as you, whether they're HR, payroll, accounting, whatever role they're in the company that might be listening to us here today. What does high employee, like physically, what does high engagement look like versus low engagement, typically within an organization?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it kind of gets at so how do you measure
Hmm.
employee engagement?
That was going to be my next question.
So it's maybe a nice place to kind of jump in because um, high employee engagement is just it's that end of the spectrum of measuring employee engagement that has employees fully engaged and feeling fully engaged. So how do you know that? There are some proxies. One is, um, if an organization does not have a formal employee engagement survey process, I highly recommend that they do have one, but that if they are going to embark on having a formal employee engagement survey process, that they do it right. And we can come back to what does doing it right look like versus
Hmm.
the way a lot of employee engagement survey processes are conceived. Um, a second indicator, if you will, or proxy for high employee engagement is to take a look at employee absenteeism. Now, there can be lots of reasons for employees being away, and frankly, it's not a bad thing in a lot of those situations where employees are away. But if, for example, you see that you have a lot of employees on short-term disability, and if you see that a lot of those employees are on short-term disability for stress or mental health related reasons, it can be an indicator that you've got issues around employee engagement. It may be that you have a toxic work environment. It may be that you have toxic leaders. It may be that you have not designed your organization in such a way that there is healthy balance between work and non-work related activities for employees. A third measure I would say is just the walking around and what human resources professionals are hearing, what EAs and AAs, administrative assistants, executive assistants, and other administrative staff are hearing, because that chatter in the corridor oftentimes is giving you a gauge as to how employees are feeling. And then the last indicator for me, and a key indicator, is what does your regretted employee turnover look like? And every industry has got some kind of measure. So retail typically has 20% plus annual turnover. In the tech industry, it varies. But I always kind of look at it from the perspective of if I can get that regretted turnover, that is, and I define regretted turnover as the employee who is performing, who chooses to leave you, if I can get that regretted turnover closer to 0%, then I'm likely having higher employee engagement and doing something right.
But okay, so I'm gonna put on my business owner hat right now. If you were sitting across my desk and we were talking about creating a program for my business, and how we're doing that, and I'm saying, okay, great. For with whatever we've designed, I've got a high engagement as represented as ideally represented by low absenteeism, low sick days, and positive survey results or positive engagement results, all that sort of thing. Yet, how do I'm going to have to measure that against my bottom line? And is it just kind of like an A/B thing? Like what was my output and my profitability before versus my output and profitability after? These are like, how do I draw that line between what businesses care about, which ultimately at the end of the day is the bottom line, you know what I mean? And that step to getting there, which is high employee engagement.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts, and it's a really great question. One thought is that first of all, the survey mechanism process itself is so cheap that I'm almost embarrassed to mention it. Um, the second comment I'd make is that investing employees so that you have higher profitability, higher customer satisfaction, greater business success uh, can be measured simply by using benchmarks that are established for each industry. So, for example, I might say that in the tech industry, um, sales and marketing represents between 33 and 39% of your OPEX spending.
Mm-hmm.
G&A is between 11 and 14% of your total OpEx spending. So I can kind of take a look and say, okay, so here's how much I'm spending, and here's how much that is left over at the end of the year. And how do I compare against these benchmarks? If I'm doing better than those benchmarks, that is, I'm getting a higher profit and I'm spending similar amounts on, my operating expenses, then I've got higher productivity. If I'm getting, if I'm spending those same dollars on OpEx, but I've got greater customer loyalty and greater market share and so on, then again, I'm achieving better results with the same expenses. So that might be a way of seeing how what you are investing in employee well-being is translating to overall business success.
So identifying some of these, you've mentioned a couple of times, the simplicity, but the power of surveys. Kathy in our comments mentioned, take a look at the feedback form employees leave when they leave. If you're doing an exit survey, as an example, especially if it's regretted, turnover, like why did they leave? What was it? How can you effectively do that? How can you effectively create these surveys so that you're getting the right feedback? I've always been hesitant to do these because as a marketer, I know how to create a survey to get the answers that I want, to prove any point that I want to make, right? That's what sales and marketing does, well, marketing in particular,
Yes.
right? So you obviously don't want that here. So what advice can we be giving those who are listening to us in creating the right survey so that we can get the right answers from our teams?
Yeah, so I'll make maybe I'll just make a comment with respect to exit interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not a huge fan of exit interviews for a couple of reasons. One is that they come so late in the process. What a shame. All these things we could have addressed earlier, and now we're only potentially hearing about them at a time that we're losing some great talent to
Mm-hmm.
the organization. And the second reason is that even when we do exit interviews, you oftentimes get a low completion rate, and you oftentimes don't get the full story. And that is because employees don't trust when they're leaving oftentimes, and with justification, how that information is going to be used. And because even if employees are honest, oftentimes there's a bias in the organization that if they're leaving, their voice counts for less. And that's a real shame. So just, if you are only relying on exit interviews, you may not be getting the full story, and it's obviously coming way too late. With respect to employee engagement surveys, you need to have both the yes, no types of questions, but you also need to have some open-ended questions. And as you say, it is possible to design questions in such a way that you can kind of get the outcome you're looking for. And so, an open-ended question like, if there's one thought you have that you'd like to share with the executive team on something that could be made better that would help the organization to be more successful, or if there was one message that you could share with the executive team to help make this um, a better, healthier place for employees to work, what might that be? I think it's important to have both the quant questions, but also to have those open-ended questions. And then, of course, making sure that you are transparent in sharing the results. And I think when we were preparing for this conversation, Sam, I shared with you a story from a time when I was with a global tech company, and we were one of the worst places to work. We had for a tech company to have 20% plus regretted employee turnover is frankly horrific. And
Hmm.
our employee engagement scores were in the 50s. And
I think Twitter today might beat that score.
yeah, it might. And so, we embarked as an executive team on a process to try to fix that. And so we started with an employee engagement survey, and we said, we were going to share the results of that survey, which we knew were going to be bad, with employees. And sure enough, the results were bad. And in response to our open ended questions, what message might you have for your executive team? We got messages like, if I hear the CEO say one team one more time, I'm going to rip his head off and shove it up his derriere. We got comments like, somebody should teach um, our head of product development, who was from Europe, to speak English properly. And we got comments like, somebody should teach our head of sales and marketing not to wear his belt around his belly button. And so there were an awful lot of hurtful comments. And we had a long conversation at the executive team table around what to do with that. And in the end, in this took a lot of courage on the part of the executive team. We decided to share everything fully with our employees, spread across 16 different countries around the world. So everybody saw those comments. And it was necessary and the beginning of building trust with the employee population. And I'll just end on at this point saying that you cannot have a successful employee engagement survey unless employees trust the process and trust leaders um, to act upon what it is that employees are sharing in a constructive way.
Mm. There's a lot of courage. I think you mentioned that you sharing all of these and making all the all of the answers public, the positive and the negative ones. That goes into leadership that you mentioned at the beginning, how important that this leadership is going to be if you're going to create a company with a high engagement level. But there's an incredible amount of courage that's going to have to be required to kind of let go of that and let that narrative play out and that discussion happen in full transparency of the rest of the company. As opposed, because as managers, we have a tendency to want to micromanage that and PR spin it and and try and present a good front. How important is that aspect in getting it out there?
Yeah, so I actually keep props on my desk, and this one, courage, is very, very important to me because um, at some point in a leader's life, frankly, in any employee's life, there is going to be a need for courage, and you will be judged. And a failure to demonstrate courage, and that courage is going to come in the form, when you think about employee engagement, of firing that top sales producer who is a toxic bully in your organization. It's going to take courage. You're worried that it's going to have a material impact on sales and revenues, but it's the right thing to do. And it is actually going to factor into higher employee engagement. Courage is going to be when, you don't have a successful quarter and you've got to say to employees that there's no bonus or there's no salary increase because the company can't afford it. Some employers are going to duck having that conversation, but they're not fooling anyone. It takes courage to speak to that. It takes courage when you have to let somebody go, in having that open, honest conversation, but making sure that in having that open, honest conversation, you are treating that individual with respect and doing everything you can to help them in moving forward. So courage is it's one of those things I look for when I'm hiring, to be honest.
So how, that, hmm, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I agree for the most part that this is something that organizations need to look at. But who within the organization is best suited to do this type of work, and what do they need to make this successful? Is this something that rests at the feet of just department managers? You know what I mean? Is it a department specific thing, company wide? How does that play out physically in an organization?
Yeah, so a fault in too many organizations is that leaders will say, we're going to do all these different things, but the rules don't apply to us.
Mm,
Every employee in the organization is going to have a performance review, but there's no performance review for the executive team. Every employee is going to participate in an employee engagement survey, but we're not going to do an employee engagement survey at the executive level. We have core values as an organization, but we're going to pay lip service to them as an executive team. And of course, employees respond to not what leaders say, but what leaders do. They witness how leaders behave every day in the workplace. And that actually is where they get their cues from. So, in answer to your question, I would say that while helping to create a healthy environment, for example, and helping to do things that contribute to higher employee engagement is the responsibility of everyone. It starts with the executives, with the leadership of the organization, and they are the ones who, frankly, have to carry the ball.
that's interesting. Now, my team is listening to this saying, okay, Sam, can we actually
Uh-oh.
do a performance review on you? Which actually, and you said that a couple of times actually, a performance review, doing a performance review and completing engagement surveys. Can you do an engagement review with the employee? Like, is that something that HR departments or managers or payroll people should be looking at doing?
So,
Is there an
I
assessment?
I think it's tough to do an engagement review as a formal process, um, because I think, if I were, for example, to ask you, "How engaged are you, Sam?" And let me give you a definition of what I mean when I say engagement. Um, I think that a part of your answer might be based on how much you trust me, David Wexler. Part of your
Mm,
answer might be based on how much do you trust the organization. Part of your answer might be based on where are you situationally? Do you have a high mortgage? Can you afford to lose this job? Do you have sick ones who are dependent upon the health benefits that the employer provide? I mean, the answer might be all over the place if I tried to do it on a one-to-one basis. There's an awful lot of risk potentially for the employee. But doing that confidential third-party employee engagement survey where you do not take the responses below, for example, a group of 5 to 8 individuals, so that it's tough to attribute a particular response or series of responses to a particular individual, would allow you to kind of get at employee engagement properly done. The performance review is actually something that I think has been, God, it's so poorly constructed in so many organizations. I like to say that uh, managers hate giving performance reviews, employees hate receiving performance reviews, and HR professionals hate being responsible for administering the whole process. And it's because the performance review is currently constructed is so flawed.
mm. Okay, well, we don't have time to, because I want to like unpack that, but that's going to require another session. So Gus, Paula, whoever's listening to this on my team, start making some notes because we're going to have to add that to the list for sure. Um, you said something there though that understanding what contributes to that engagement factor, engagement, I guess percentage or level, might be you know what's happening in their personal life in terms of what is their are they stressed out because mortgage rates have gone up and they can no longer afford their mortgage. Maybe they're going through a divorce or they're having a problem with a child or whatever it is. um, like, I'm assuming that's the importance of having this third party, because most companies do the surveying, because most organizations and leaders that I've ever worked with in my career have never bothered to ask those types of questions.
Yeah, so the survey won't get at those kinds of things necessarily. So for example, if on my team there is an individual who is struggling with mental health issues, a survey done once a year. Um, and by the way, I don't recommend them any more frequently than once a year, and there are lots of reasons for that. But a survey done once a year isn't necessarily going to get at that, and the questions contained in that survey may not get at that. And so any people leader has to be having regular interactions with each member of their team. I'm a big believer in regular one-to-ones, and I'm a big believer in leaders making sure that during those one-to-ones, they're checking in, not in an obtrusive way, but checking in with their employees. Because if an employee is struggling with whatever the issue may be outside of work, and then as a human being, quite apart from just also having some kind of a working relationship, we want to, or we should be wanting to try to help people. And people won't necessarily volunteer these things, and so we have to read body language. We have to look at cues in terms of people's work habits are starting to change, their interactions with people are starting to change, other cues that can help us to maybe be able to have a conversation that gets to a deeper place.
Mm. So we're coming close to kind of the end of that, what I think is an optimal time for one of these conversations for people that are listening. So maybe if we can wrap up quickly, with one final thought, and that is, if we have to leave everybody with some tips and recommendations or ideas on, developing, a high employee engagement policy or practice or philosophy within their organization. Again, high level, what are some of the things maybe that they could jot down and start thinking about or, auditing their own company if they do this well or not?
Yeah, so I think if you are at all concerned around the level of employee engagement inside your organization, then your leadership team has to buy into that being something that is worthy of addressing, and has to have the courage to take the steps necessary to address it. I think that if there is that buy-in and that courage to do something, then you should engage with a third-party employee engagement survey provider, have a series of questions, make sure that you do education and communication up front so that employees understand what the survey is for, what it is not for, how it's going to be used, how the results are going to be shared, the importance of it, the fact that it is confidential. And then the survey itself has to be something that employees can do in 10 minutes. It's got to be short, and it's got to be action focused. And then when the results come out, and they have to be both closed questions and open-ended questions, leaders have to do something with those results. And I always recommend, as part of the communications up front, letting employees know that the output will help the organization to focus on things that can be done to make things better. But depending on what comes out of the survey, not everything can be tackled at once. And then the final thought is that when the survey results are out, that's the beginning, not an end. Those survey results are intended to be used by leaders to be able to have deeper, richer conversations with their teams to really get at what is meant by some of the survey results, to make sure that leaders are focused on the right things. And then leaders need to take action in a timely basis.
Hmm. Interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time. This was fascinating. I really enjoy speaking with you.
Thank you.
I love your experiences and just the stories that you tell are fantastic. I would hope that you would agree to come back, and I want to unpack your thoughts on performance reviews. I've circled that 3 times here on my notebook because that's a big pet peeve of mine too. You're right. I hate doing them. I know they're important to do it, and I keep trying to get better at them, and I don't think in my 15 years I've ever gotten that perfect. So I look forward to that conversation. If anybody wants to get in touch with David, LinkedIn is obviously a great way to do it, but also check out the bio information in this email, in this video, and you will see his contact information. If you want to reach out, please leave us comments here if you've got any questions, and answer each other. Don't wait for David or I to jump on and answer a question. Please help each other out. That's what we really want here on the 17th floor, is that peer-to-peer engagement. Mentor each other, share your experiences, and together we can really grow this practice of human capital management across this country. David, thank you very much for all your time today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Sam.
And pay attention to the 17thfloor.com for upcoming webinars that we do throughout the year. We try and get to these every couple of weeks. And if you've got an idea, if there's a topic out there that's really burning in your organization or in your department that you think you would like to see an expert share some opinions on, please send us a note on the site and we will try and add that to our queue. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks again.